The 1970s swept away old morals, unleashing a wave of wild liberation across Britain. In this era of excess, a generation of stunning icons rewrote the rules of romance, leaving a trail of broken hearts and scandalous headlines behind them. These women changed partners with shocking frequency, living turbulent private lives that delighted the tabloids but often hid deep loneliness. From rock muses to screen sirens, we uncover the 10 stars who dared to love without limits. Subscribe now and tell us in the comments, is true love ever possible in the spotlight? Let us begin. Diana Dawes. The first name on our list is the woman who was rightfully crowned the British answer to Marilyn Monroe, a blonde bombshell who defined an entire era of glamour and excess. Diana Dawes was more than just a movie star. She was a force of nature whose appetite for life was matched only by her insatiable hunger for romance. By the time the 1970s arrived, Diana had transitioned from the breathless starlet of the silver screen to a matriarch of British show business, presiding over a court of chaos in her sprawling mansion. While the public adored her for her brassy humor and undeniable charisma, the private life of the Swindon siren was a carousel of lovers that spun with dizzying speed. She did not just date men, she consumed them, seeking a validation in their arms that the fickle movie industry could no longer provide. To Diana, a man was often an accessory, essential for the evening but easily replaceable by the following morning. Her home, a lavish estate near Ascot, became the epicenter of the most notorious social scene in the country. Throughout the 1970s, Diana hosted legendary gatherings that were whispered about in every corner of London. These were not polite tea parties, but wild, hedonistic soirees where the guest list included everyone from Cray associate gangsters to top-tier politicians and Hollywood royalty. It was an open secret that the keys to the bedrooms were as freely available as the champagne. Diana herself made no secret of her modern approach to relationships. She championed a lifestyle of total freedom, often engaging in multiple romances simultaneously. She famously quipped that she was the only one who knew the real truth about the men of Britain, implying that her little black book contained secrets that could topple the government. Her approach to love was predatory and unapologetic. She moved from one conquest to another with the confidence of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted. However, beneath the veneer of the sexually liberated icon lay a deep-seated vulnerability. The men she chose were often volatile or dangerous, reflecting her own inner turmoil. Her marriage to the actor Alan Lake in the 1970s was a relationship defined by fire and fury. They were known to have a fiercely open arrangement, bringing third parties into their domestic life in a desperate attempt to keep the spark alive. Diana changed lovers like gloves because she was terrified of the cold reality of being alone. She wrote scandalous memoirs during this decade, naming names and exposing the habits of her conquests, turning her romantic history into a bestseller. Yet, for all the men who passed through her life, few truly stayed to see the woman behind the makeup. In her relentless pursuit of passion, she left a trail of discarded suitors, a testament to a woman who tried to fill the silence of her soul with the noise of a crowded bedroom. Joan Collins. The second lady in our gallery of heartbreak is the woman who would later define the 1980s as a shoulder-padded villainess, but her rehearsal for that role took place in the turbulent boudoir of the 1970s. Joan Collins was not merely an actress, she was a predatory force of nature in the London social scene, a woman who treated romance with the strategic cunning of a military general. Long before she became the iconic Alexis Carrington, she was living a life that made the soap operas look tame by comparison. To the tabloids, she was the dark-haired siren who devoured men, moving from one high-profile partner to the next with a ruthlessness that left the public gasping. In an era when women were expected to be demure, Joan was unapologetically voracious, declaring that she needed a man who could handle her fire, a requirement that saw many suitors burn out trying. Her romantic itinerary during this decade was nothing short of exhausting. Having already dispensed with 2 husbands before the decade even began, she entered the 1970s with a hunger for something new. She married the American businessman Ron Cass in 1972, but this union was merely the eye of the storm. Surrounding this relationship was a whirlwind of rumors and whispered affairs with some of the most desirable bachelors of the day. Joan did not wait for men to approach her. She selected them. Her philosophy was simple and shocking for the time. Why should men have all the fun? She treated her male counterparts as delicious distractions, enjoying their company and their adoration until the excitement faded, at which point she would seamlessly transition to the next admirer. Her sister, Jackie Collins, wrote best-selling novels like The Stud, and it was widely believed that the insatiable main characters were heavily inspired by Joan's own uninhibited adventures between the sheets. The scandal reached its zenith towards the end of the decade with the release of the film adaptations of those very books. Joan starred in them, effectively playing a heightened version of herself, a woman who used men for pleasure and advancement. The line between the actress and the woman blurred completely. She became the poster girl for the sexually aggressive older woman, a label she wore with pride. While other actresses tried to hide their multiple partners to protect their wholesome image, Joan flaunted her conquests like trophies. She changed men not out of insecurity, but out of boredom. If a man could not keep her entertained or provide the lifestyle she demanded, he was swiftly discarded. Her life was a revolving door of passion, arguments, and dramatic exits. By the time the decade closed, she had solidified her reputation as Britain's most glamorous man-eater, a woman who proved that in the game of love, she was the only player who truly knew the rules. Sarah Miles. The third figure in our parade of passion is the definitive wild child of the British aristocracy, a woman who treated social conventions with utter disdain and viewed monogamy as a cage designed for lesser souls. Sarah Miles was the rebellious daughter of a wealthy engineer, a sprite-like beauty with huge, expressive eyes that seemed to promise trouble. She burst onto the scene in the 1960s, but it was in the 1970s that her romantic life became a public spectacle of epic proportions. While she was married to the legendary screenwriter Robert Bolt, the man who penned classics like Dr. Zhivago, their union was anything but traditional. Sarah made no secret of her belief that one man could never be enough to satisfy her voracious appetite for life and affection. She famously described herself as a free spirit who needed to drink from many fountains, a philosophy that saw her engaging in a string of dalliances that would have destroyed a weaker marriage. Her approach to love was not just open, it was aggressively liberated. She did not hide her lovers in the shadows. She often befriended them and integrated them into her chaotic domestic sphere, creating a bohemian atmosphere that baffled the conservative press. She was the queen of the jet-set lifestyle, moving between film sets and luxury hotels, leaving a trail of infatuated men in her wake. To Sarah, changing partners was as natural as changing costumes for a role. It was a way to explore different facets of her own personality. However, this carefree attitude towards romance collided with a dark reality in 1973 during the filming of The Man Who Loved Cat Dancing. In a scandal that rocked the world, her business manager and obsessed admirer was found dead in her motel room in Arizona, a tragedy that occurred while she was arguably involved with her co-star, Burt Reynolds. The press went into a frenzy. Overnight, the lovable rebel was painted as a dangerous femme fatale, a woman whose chaotic love life had finally led to a fatal conclusion. Yet, even under the intense glare of a murder investigation and a media witch hunt, Sarah remained defiantly herself. She did not retreat into a shell of shame. Instead, she continued to live by her own rules, eventually divorcing, and then, in a twist that only she could orchestrate, remarrying Robert Bolt years later after he suffered a stroke. Her journey through the 1970s was a masterclass in scandalous survival. She was a woman who gave her heart freely and frequently, treating men as essential experiences in the grand adventure of her life. Sarah Miles proved that, in the theater of the 1970s, she was the director of her own romantic destiny, regardless of the tragic cost. Britt Ekland. The fourth entry in our catalogue of captivating heartbreakers is a woman who, although born in Sweden, became the undisputed queen of the British social scene in the 1970s. Britt Ekland was the ultimate trophy, a blonde fantasy who adorned the arms of the most famous men on the planet. While she was a successful actress and a Bond girl in The Man with the Golden Gun, her acting career often took a backseat to her full-time profession of being the world's most glamorous girlfriend. For Britt, a man was not merely a companion, he was a lifestyle choice. She was famous for her chameleon-like ability to completely reinvent herself to suit the man she was with, changing her clothes, her habits, and her personality, as easily as one changes a pair of silk gloves. In the 1970s, she moved from the chaotic genius of Peter Sellers into the rock and roll excess of the music industry with a fluidity that stunned the public. Her most defining romance of the decade was with the raspy-voiced rocker Rod Stewart. Their relationship was the stuff of tabloid legend, a whirlwind of leopard print, satin, and private jets. Brit devoted herself entirely to him, effectively pausing her own life to manage his. She organized his band, styled his hair, and even whispered the sensual French vocals on his hit song, Tonight's the Night. Yet, despite her total submission to his world, the relationship was volatile and temporary. When it ended brutally, with Brit finding herself evicted and heartbroken. But Brit was resilient. She did not mourn for long. Her philosophy was that a woman is defined by the man standing next to her, and she ensured that the space beside her was never empty for more than a heartbeat. Throughout the decade, her little black book was a who's who of the entertainment elite. Before Rod, she had been with the American record producer Lou Adler, adopting a hippie chic aesthetic to match his laid-back Californian vibe. After Rod, she was linked to a string of other high-profile suitors, always searching for the next great love affair to anchor her drifting life. The press was often cruel, painting her as a woman who clung to fame through her bedfellows, but the truth was more complex. Brit was a woman terrified of solitude, admitting later that she felt invisible without a man to validate her existence. She changed men frequently because she was chasing a fairy tale that did not exist, seeking a permanent security in a world of temporary thrills. She gave her heart to everyone she dated, holding nothing back, only to pack up her bags and move on to the next chapter when the inevitable cracks appeared. Her life in the 1970s was a breathless run from one embrace to another, leaving a legacy of iconic photos and a reputation as the woman every man wanted, but no man could truly keep. Barbara Windsor. The fifth name on our list belongs to the pint-sized national treasure who defined the saucy, seaside postcard humor of the 1970s. Barbara Windsor was the giggle heard around the world, the blonde bombshell of the Carry On films who famously lost her bikini top in Carry On Camping. To the British public, she was the bubbly, innocent girl next door who just happened to be incredibly curvy. However, beneath the infectious laughter and the squeaky voice lay a woman with a dangerous appetite for the criminal underworld and a chaotic romantic life that would make a gangster blush. Barbara did not just date men, she collected villains. She famously admitted that she was attracted to men who could protect her, which often meant individuals who carried knives rather than bouquets. Her love life in the 1970s was a dangerous game of musical chairs played with some of the most volatile men in London. Her most scandalous entanglement of the decade was a secret affair that threatened to destroy one of the most beloved partnerships in comedy history. While filming the Carry On series, Barbara engaged in a passionate and tumultuous romance with her co-star, Sid James. Sid, who was famously described as having a face like a crumpled bedsheet, was utterly obsessed with her. He was decades older and married, yet he pursued Barbara with a ferocity that bordered on madness. For Barbara, Sid was a protector figure, a man of power on the set, but she treated his devotion with a fickleness that broke him. She would engage in intimate relations with him in her dressing room one moment and then dismiss him the next, reportedly finding his intensity overwhelming. While Sid was writing her love letters and planning to leave his wife, Barbara was already looking for her next thrill, eventually breaking his heart in a way that many believe contributed to his decline. But the defining relationship of her 1970s was not with an actor, but with a fugitive. She fell into the arms of Ronnie Knight, a charming but dangerous man with deep ties to the criminal fraternity. Barbara found the danger intoxicating. She married Ronnie in 1964, but their marriage in the 70s was a roller coaster of police raids, court cases, and infidelity. She stood by him even when he was involved in the legendary Security Express robbery, the second largest cash robbery in British history at the time. She was the ultimate moll, enjoying the thrill of the bad boy lifestyle while simultaneously charming the nation on primetime television. She changed the men in her life based on who could offer the most excitement and security at that moment, moving from the adoration of Sid James to the adrenaline of Ronnie Knight without missing a beat. Barbara Windsor proved that behind the giggle was a woman of steel who played the game of love by her own dangerous rules. Charlotte Rampling. The sixth figure in our gallery of heartbreakers is a woman whose hypnotic gaze and icy demeanor made her the ultimate enigma of the 1970s. Charlotte Rampling was not interested in the conventional path of the blushing bride. She was the high priestess of the decadent 70s, a woman who treated monogamy as an outdated concept for lesser mortals. While other actresses played at being rebellious, Charlotte lived it with a cool detachment that fascinated and terrified the British public in equal measure. She was the daughter of a NATO commander, yet she spent the decade dismantling every rule of polite society, engaging in complex, multi-layered relationships that left the tabloid press scrambling to keep up. To Charlotte, men were not possessors, but partners in her exploration of the boundaries of desire, and she changed the dynamics of her love life as frequently as she changed her film roles. Her most notorious romantic experiment of the decade became the stuff of legend in 1972. At a time when the nuclear family was still the gold standard, Charlotte openly entered into a domestic arrangement that scandalized the nation. She lived in a ménage à trois with her husband, the publicist Brian Southcombe, and a handsome male model named Randall Lawrence. The three of them shared a home, a life, and, according to the feverish whispers of the time, a bed. When questioned by a shocked press, Charlotte coolly dismissed their moral outrage, stating that there were no jealousies between them and that love should not be confined to a single person. She treated these two men not as rivals, but as complementary accessories to her life, effectively holding court with a male harem while the rest of Britain watched in stunned silence. However, Charlotte's appetite for change meant that even this radical arrangement could not hold her forever. As the decade progressed, she grew restless with the London scene and the scrutiny that accompanied her unconventional lifestyle. In 1976, she effectively discarded her previous life to relocate to France, drawn by the intense and brooding composer Jean-Michel Jarre. She left her husband and her bohemian experiment behind without looking back, proving that her loyalty was first and foremost to her own evolving needs. Her roles on screen, particularly in the controversial film The Night Porter, mirrored her off-screen persona, a woman who found comfort in the dark, complicated corners of romance where few others dared to tread. Charlotte Rampling did not just change men, she consumed their worlds, took what she needed for her own growth, and then moved on to the next intensity, leaving the men to pick up the pieces of the boundaries she had shattered. Marianne Faithfull. The seventh name on our list belongs to the ultimate muse of the 1970s, a woman whose beauty was so ethereal that she seemed to step out of a pre-Raphaelite painting. Marianne Faithfull was the daughter of an Austrian baroness and a British professor, a girl born into high culture who chose instead to descend into the chaotic heart of the rock and roll underworld. To the public, she was the tragic angel who had been corrupted by the Rolling Stones, but the reality was that Marianne was an active and eager participant in her own liberation. Throughout the 1970s, she lived a life that was a frantic blur of high fashion and low life, moving from one legendary partner to another with a reckless abandon that left her reputation in tatters. She viewed romance not as a destination, but as a fuel for her artistic and personal survival, often seeking out the most brilliant and broken men she could find to mirror her own internal storms. Her romantic history in this decade is a dizzying map of the cultural elite. After her explosive and world-famous relationship with Mick Jagger ended in 1970, Marianne did not retreat into a quiet life. Instead, she spiraled into a series of intense, short-lived affairs that were often fueled by shared excesses. She was linked to artists, musicians, and drifters, treating each new man as a lifeline in her turbulent sea of existence. She famously spent a period of the 1970s living on the streets of Soho, yet even in her darkest hours, she remained a magnetic figure who drew men to her like moths to a flame. She changed her companions as often as she changed her surroundings, seeking a temporary sanctuary in their arms from the crushing weight of her own fame and the addictions that haunted her. She was a woman who gave herself entirely to the moment, never looking back at the hearts she left behind. The most shocking aspect of Marianne's 1970s was the way she used her romantic conquests to reinvent her identity. She moved from being the pop princess to the goddess of the underground, and each man she associated with provided a new chapter for her mythology. She was involved with the Irish aristocrat Paddy Rossmore and later the punk rocker Ben Brierley, whom she married in 1979. Each relationship was a desperate attempt to find a sense of belonging in a world that she felt had discarded her. She treated men as both shields and mirrors, using their love to protect herself from the cold and their eyes to see a version of herself that was still beautiful. By the time the decade ended with the release of her masterpiece Broken English, it was clear that Marianne had survived 1,000 romantic deaths. She had changed men like gloves because she was searching for a fit that didn't pinch, a journey that made her one of the most scorched and celebrated survivors of the decade. Fiona Richmond, the eighth woman in our chronicle of the scandalous 70s, is perhaps the most honest and unapologetic of them all. Fiona Richmond was not just a star of the stage and screen, she was the living symbol of the permissive society in Britain. While others conducted their affairs in the shadows or behind the closed doors of country estates, Fiona made a career out of her romantic and physical freedom. As the star of the hit revue Let My People Come and a regular fixture in the satirical magazine Men Only, she was the woman who brought the sexual revolution into the mainstream. To the public, she was a figure of pure provocation, a blonde goddess who seemed to have stepped out of a dream to challenge the very foundations of British modesty. Fiona didn't just change men, she championed the right for every woman to do exactly the same, treating the male of the species as a delightful source of entertainment and exploration. Throughout the 1970s, Fiona's love life was a high-speed pursuit of pleasure that mirrored her love for fast cars and private jets. Her most significant relationship was with the theatre mogul and publisher Paul Raymond, the richest man in the British entertainment industry. Together, they formed a power couple that ruled the nightlife of Soho, but their bond was anything but conventional. Fiona was the queen of his empire, yet she maintained a level of independence that was unheard of for the time. She openly engaged in dalliances with the elite of the London social scene, including aristocrats, actors, and sporting legends. She viewed her romantic life as a form of research for her writing and her performances, documenting her adventures with a wit and frankness that both delighted and horrified the establishment. To Fiona, a man was a companion for an adventure, someone to share a glass of champagne and a fast lap around a racing circuit with, rather than a permanent anchor. What made Fiona truly unique in the 1970s was her refusal to play the victim. While other women of the era were often portrayed as being led astray by the men in their lives, Fiona was always the one in the driver's seat. She navigated the male-dominated world of show business with a shrewd intelligence, using her beauty and her many romantic connections to build her own brand. She changed partners frequently because she was a connoisseur of experiences, refusing to settle for the dull predictability of a traditional marriage. Even when the tabloids tried to paint her as a scandalous figure, she simply smiled and invited them to watch her next show. She was a woman who gave her affection to many, but her soul to none, preserving a core of independence that made her one of the most powerful and envied women of the decade. Fiona Richmond proved that in the liberated 1970s, a woman could be the master of her own desires, changing men as easily as she changed her iconic outfits. Jackie Collins. The ninth name on our list is the woman who didn't just participate in the scandalous social scene of the 1970s, she chronicled it, mastered it, and eventually sold it back to the world. Jackie Collins was the younger sister of Joan, but she possessed a different kind of hunger. While her sister was chasing fame on the screen, Jackie was moving through the bedrooms and boardrooms of London and Hollywood, collecting the secrets of the powerful like rare jewels. To the public, she was the glamorous author with the leopard print accessories and the knowing smile, but her own romantic life was a whirlwind of activity that served as the primary research for her provocative novels. Jackie believed that a woman should be the predator, not the prey, and she lived out this philosophy by engaging in a series of high-profile romances that kept the gossip columnists working around the clock. Throughout the 1970s, Jackie was the queen of the discotheque scene, a regular at legendary spots like Tramp in London. She was married to the businessman Oscar Lerman, but their union was famously modern and liberated. Jackie was constantly surrounded by a retinue of the world's most desirable men, from brooding actors to charismatic musicians. She changed her companions with a calculated frequency, enjoying the thrill of the chase and the intensity of a new spark. She was often seen on the arm of a new stud or star, using these relationships to gain entry into the most private circles of the elite. To Jackie, a man was a story waiting to be told, a collection of habits and vulnerabilities that she would later translate into the pages of her bestsellers. She was unapologetic about her appetite for new experiences, viewing each new partner as a chapter in the grand book of her life. What set Jackie apart from her contemporaries was her absolute control over her narrative. She never allowed a man to diminish her or slow her down. If a relationship became stale, or if a partner attempted to stifle her independence, she moved on without a second thought. Her life in the 1970s was a masterclass in social climbing and romantic freedom. She used her many connections to build an empire, eventually becoming one of the most successful authors in history. She gave her time and her attention to many men, but her true loyalty was always to her own ambition. By the time the decade closed, she had transformed the scandalous woman trope into a position of immense power. Jackie Collins proved that, in the 1970s, changing men like gloves wasn't just a lifestyle. It was a business strategy that made her the most famous confidant of the century. Vivian Merchant. The final name in our selection of the 1970s is a woman whose tragic story serves as a somber reminder of the heavy price paid for a life governed by the whims of love and betrayal. Vivian Merchant was an actress of immense talent, a star of the Royal Shakespeare Company, and an Academy Award nominee who was widely regarded as one of the finest stage performers in Britain. She was the quintessential sophisticated woman of the era, elegant, poised, and possessed of a razor-sharp intellect. However, her private life was a battlefield of passion that eventually laid waste to her health and her career. For much of the decade, Vivian was defined by her intense and long-standing marriage to the legendary playwright Harold Pinter. They were the golden couple of the London intellectual scene, but beneath the surface, Vivian was navigating a world of constant romantic shifting and public humiliation that would eventually see her lose her grip on reality. The 1970s were a period of excruciating public heartbreak for Vivian, as she found herself caught in a cycle of replacing one emotional dependency with another. When her marriage to Pinter famously collapsed in 1975 due to his high-profile affair with the historian Antonia Fraser, Vivian did not go quietly. She became a fixture in the tabloids, not for her acting, but for her scathing public outbursts and her desperate attempts to find solace in the arms of others. She moved through a series of fleeting and often ill-advised relationships, attempting to fill the void left by the man who had been her creative and personal anchor for 20 years. To the public, it appeared she was changing her companions in a frantic bid for revenge or comfort, but those close to her saw a woman who was simply unable to exist without a man to define her world. As the decade drew to a close, Vivian's romantic and personal life became increasingly chaotic. She turned to the bottle to numb the pain of her serial heartbreaks, and the men who passed through her life in these final years were often mere shadows, unable to provide the stability she so desperately craved. She had once been the muse for some of the greatest plays of the 20th century, but by the late 1970s, she was more often found in the gossip columns, portrayed as a tragic figure who could not let go of the past. Her inability to find a lasting connection after the shattering of her marriage led to a profound isolation. Vivian Merchant passed away in 1982, at the age of 53, from complications related to her long-term struggle with the bottle. She remains a haunting figure from the decade, a woman of supreme brilliance who gave her heart entirely to a world that ultimately left her alone in the spotlight.